Hey friends, welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. And today we're cutting straight through the noise, the hot takes, the conspiracy threads, the memes, the drama, the performative outrage, and the algorithm fed nonsense to talk about something that is genuinely shocking, genuinely unprecedented, and very, very real, because this is not internet gossip or celebrity mess or some viral distraction. This is a First Amendment story, a journalism story, a government power story, and it affects every single person who has ever relied on the news to figure out what the hell is actually happening in this country. And it starts with this. Journalist Don Lemon was taken into federal custody by U.S. agents in Los Angeles, and not for a violent crime, not for fraud, not for tax evasion, not for storming a building, not for anything that most people would recognize as criminal behavior, but it was over his coverage of a protest inside a church. And according to multiple reports, federal agents arrested him late at night while he was in town covering the Grammy Awards. They put him in handcuffs, processed him, and then released him pending further proceedings, which already sounds like something out of a political thriller instead of real life. But no, welcome to 2026, baby. This is where we are at. Before we get into all of those details, make sure you're following me on socials, on TikTok and Instagram at _hotairpod. Visit my website, you know the drill. Go there to shop my merch, submit your listener stories and topic suggestions. Now, we're going to get into the context of all of this BS. Like, context is everything here. And without the context, this whole thing kind of sounds surreal. And trust me, once you hear the full picture, you're going to understand why media lawyers, civil rights groups, and journalists across the country collectively went, excuse me, what's happening here? And before we get into those legal weeds of it all, which we absolutely will, because you know I love a good statute breakdown moment, we need to set the stage. And it's not just lightly set. We need the full theatrical lighting, the backdrop, the orchestra tuning, because this episode isn't just about one arrest. It is about the First Amendment. It's about journalism. It's about how the government interprets the law and sometimes how it stretches that law until it fucking squeaks. And it's about political narrative control, about who gets labeled as dangerous, who gets labeled as patriotic, and who gets labeled a problem simply for showing up with a camera and asking questions. And if that doesn't make you sit up a little bit straighter, it should. Because once the government starts deciding which reporters are acceptable, that's when things get weird really fucking fast. So buckle up. Let's hit it. Okay, actually, let's pause, because before we dive headfirst into the courtrooms and indictments and federal business, I do have to talk about something else first, because it genuinely got me heated, and it honestly connects more than you think, because culture wars don't happen in isolation. They bleed into everything. And if you are paying attention at all to the news or social media, and if you watched the Super Bowl just the other day, you already know exactly what I'm about to say. The halftime show that broke the entire internet. Bad Bunny, that fine-ass man, and not just, cute pop star performance, this was actually history. Puerto Rican superstar Bad Bunny headlined the NFL Super Bowl halftime show and delivered huge portions of the performance in Spanish. He was celebrating Latin culture and heritage and pride on one of the most American stages imaginable, and it was loud and joyful and unapologetic and beautiful and political in the subtle, like, we exist and we belong here kind of way. He brought out heavy hitters like Lady Gaga, Ricky Martin, Cardi B was there, and he closed with a message that literally said on the giant ass screen, the only thing more powerful than hate is love. They were waving flags, naming countries across the Americas, holding a football that read, "Together we are America." And it felt less like a concert and more like a cultural mic drop. And the numbers? were massive. We are talking well over 130 million viewers, which puts him right up there with the most watched halftime shows ever, like Kendrick Lamar, Usher, Lady Gaga, like the legends, the icons, the girlies and the gays and the dads and the football bros, all tuning in together. Like, what could bring us more together than football, I guess? The world showed up. And yet somehow, instead of saying, wow, cool performance, we just got a hell of a lot of backlash. Loud, dramatic, pearl clutching backlash. And this is where the hypocrisy starts glowing bright as fuck. Because let's be real, we have a long history of non-American born artists headlining this show. Shakira, Rihanna, Coldplay, U2. We've had J-Lo and Bruno Mars, who are people of color, and nobody lost their minds. Nobody screamed that English was under attack. Nobody cried that America was being disrespected. But suddenly, a Puerto Rican artist performs in Spanish, and it's un-American and disgusting and indoctrination. And I'm like, bitches, Puerto Ricans are literally American citizens. Geography is free. Google exists. Like, calm down. But the outrage was not about facts. It was about discomfort. It was about who gets to represent America and who certain people think should not represent America. I'm just going to rewind to just the fact that U2 performed, right? They're not American born. They are just white. So nobody was like, this isn't American, because they were singing in English and they are white. That really sums up everything. That's all you need to fucking know. And then, because of course, a conservative political group decided to stage their own All-American halftime show as a counter program. Yes, a counter program to a concert. Like, we're counter programming Joy now. And Kid Rock headlined it. Patriotic branding was everywhere. It was English first, like all the buzzwords, okay? And look, about 6.1 million viewers at its peak is still a lot of humans. I heard about 5 million, sure. But compared to 130 million, that is not a revolution. That is a group chat that most people aren't even paying attention to. And the contrast was very wild. One show was celebrating inclusion and global identity. The other marketed basically as, this is what real America looks like. And when you look at it side by side, you realize this wasn't about music at all. It was culture war theater. And why am I bringing this up in a story about journalism and arrests? Because this exact energy, this fear of changing narratives, this discomfort with representation, this need to control the story of what America is the same energy that shows up when the government starts targeting reporters who document uncomfortable realities. Like, it kind of all connected in theme, right? Who gets the mic, who gets visibility, and who gets labeled a threat. I also, side note, would just like to point out that Kid Rock has a song, I think it's from the 2000s, early 2000s. He headlined this anti-Super Bowl halftime show that was also put on by Turning Point USA, that was previously run by Charlie Kirk, that we know is very mega. Turning Point USA is really just, I mean, it's, putting it bluntly, it's the fucking KKK, but in 2026. Let's be fucking real here. Good Lord, Nicki Minaj is part of that too. That just all came rushing back into me. But Kid Rock has a song about how he likes to date girls that are underage, and the lyrics are slipping my mind right now. I had them written down somewhere, but I'm looking around and now I don't know where they are. But he literally says in his song that people say that it's statutory dating someone underage, and he says it's mandatory. And that's who you have leading this. Basically a pedophile, which falls in line with MAGA, falls in line with Trump, falls in line with all of these apparent, Christian Republicans who very recently have all been arrested for child sexual pornography content on their fucking laptops, okay? Let's be fucking real. I'm going to call it like it is. I'm about to start getting heated. So before I do, we're going to pivot back, okay? Because a few weeks after Bad Bunny was announced, and in the midst of all of this, something happened that hit equally as hard as the halftime drama. So on January 18th in Minnesota, a group of anti-ICE protesters entered a church during a Sunday service. They chanted, they disrupted, they're protesting a pastor who also works as an ICE officer. It's very tense, it's messy, it's emotional, and we know that Minnesota had so much going on there. Multiple people were killed by ICE agents, and there was riots, or not really riots. There was protests, a lot of peaceful protests. And in the middle of all of this, Don Lemon, you know him, not protesting, not leading chants, not organizing anything. He's just reporting. He's interviewing people, he's filming, he's live streaming. He interviewed the pastor of this church, who is also the ICE agent. He's doing literally the same thing that journalists do every single day. And at the time, there were no arrests. There wasn't really much of a scene. Law enforcement lets him leave. Normal news cycle stuff, right? He's an independent journalist. But weeks later, the Justice Department launches an investigation. A magistrate judge initially refuses to sign a warrant, saying that prosecutors haven't shown enough evidence, which is huge. Judges don't casually say no to probable cause. That's the system working as designed. Checks and balances. Executive branch says, we want to arrest. Judicial branch says, prove it. And the answer was basically, no, you don't have enough evidence. That should have been the end of it. Except it wasn't. Because fast forward to Los Angeles, Grammys weekend, red carpet, celebrities, flashbulbs, and suddenly federal agents show up to Don Lemon's hotel room. They handcuff him, arrest him. It's a public spectacle. He later says they grabbed him at the elevator, showed him a warrant on a cell phone, and treated him like a flight risk, even though his lawyer had already offered to voluntarily surrender him. And if you're thinking, that feels a bit dramatic for a journalist covering a protest, you are not alone, because that's exactly what half the legal world said. And this is where the real question kicks in, the one that should make everyone, left, right, center, doesn't matter where you are, pause for a hot second. If a journalist can be arrested for documenting a protest inside a public controversy, what does that mean for every other reporter the next time something messy happens? Because journalism is not clean. It's not staged, usually. It happens where the tension lives, in protests, courtrooms, crime scenes, political rallies. That's literally the job. And if presence alone becomes criminal, that's a problem, and a very big one. And that is pretty much where the story really begins. And the reason I'm discussing this, and I felt the need, not only because Don Lemon is a gay man of color who is just sharing the fucking truth with the world, but recently I made an error in terms of my pronunciation of the new mayor of New York City. And I received some backlash, and people left comments saying that as a journalist, and then I was like, wait, am I a journalist? I mean, I guess I'm reporting on current events. I'm trying to share fact-based perspectives. So, I mean, I don't really know where I fall in line with that. But this is important because if they're going to shut down Don Lemon, or try to anyway, it's very easy to shut down podcasts or social media accounts that don't align with what the people in power want you to see and believe. So this is where things shift from messy news story into full constitutional chess match territory. Because once you get past like the drama, the hotel hallway arrest, and the red carpet optics, and the late night talk show retellings, you land squarely in the legal question that actually matters. And it's not sexy at all. It's not memeable, but it's foundational. And that question is simple. What exactly is the government claiming that Don Lemon did that rises to the level of a federal crime? Because if you strip away the politics and the personalities, the courts don't care about vibes. They care about statutes, and prosecutors don't indict people based on, we didn't like what he was filming. They have to point to specific laws and say, this right here, this is what you violated. And in Lemon's case, the charges are tied to two federal statutes that most Americans have never even heard of unless they went to law school or binge watch C-SPAN for fun, which sounds like a fucking bore to me. The first one is conspiracy against rights, which already sounds very dramatic, does it not? Like something out of a spy movie. But what it actually means is interfering with someone's constitutional rights through coordination or agreement. And historically, it's been used in really serious cases like civil rights era intimidation, voter suppression, actual organized efforts to stop people from exercising protected freedoms. Not exactly journalist with a camera territory. The second one, which is better known as the FACE Act, which most people associate with abortion clinic protests, it stands for the Freedom of Access to Clinical Entrances Act, originally passed to prevent people from physically blocking clinics or threatening patients and doctors. But here's the twist. It also covers places of religious worship. So interfering with a church service can fall under it too. And that also gets really wishy-washy because what about the people who have protest church services in Black communities or church services that are not Christian? Those ones are probably MAGA lovers there that are going to mosques and things. So I think it's a bit wishy-washy, like who does it protect and who does it not, right? So that's where the prosecutors are trying to wedge Lemon into the picture. They are arguing that by entering the church with protesters, filming, live streaming, and questioning people closely during the disruption, that he wasn't just observing the event. He was somehow participating in interference with religious worship, which, legally speaking, is a massive stretch. I'm not a lawyer, but that is a big stretch because participation and documentation are certainly not the same thing. If they were, every war correspondent would be charged with aiding in a battle. Every court reporter would be charged with obstruction. Every journalist who films a protest would be treated like a protester. And that's the heart of this whole thing. Intent. Was he there to disrupt or was he there to report? Because journalism, by definition, puts you in uncomfortable rooms, uncomfortable situations. That's the job description. You don't report on protests from your sofa. You don't cover police action through a telescope. You go where the story is. And sometimes that's scary and chaotic and loud. Sometimes that's inconvenient for people that are in power, but inconvenience is not a crime. And this is exactly why the First Amendment exists in the first place. Let's slow down for a second and really talk about that, because people throw around First Amendment like it's a catchphrase without actually unpacking what it protects. It doesn't just protect speech. It doesn't just protect the right to tweet spicy opinions or argue on Facebook. It explicitly protects the press, which means the ability to gather information, document events, publish what you find, and hold power accountable without the fear of government punishment. The founders of this country didn't add that for decoration. They added it because they had literally just fought a war against a government that punished dissent and controlled information. They understood something that was really fundamental. If the government gets to decide which journalists are allowed to report, then democracy collapses real damn quick. So when Lemon says publicly, the First Amendment protects the work I do, he's not being dramatic. He's being textbook constitutional. Now, and this is important because nuance matters, the First Amendment is not a magic invisibility cloak. Journalists can't break laws and then just yell, "Press, I'm doing my job." If you trespass, you can still get charged. If you assault someone, it's still illegal. If you actively help commit a crime, it is not protected. But being present and filming and asking questions, that is literally news gathering. And historically, courts have defended that very hard. There's decades of precedent saying journalists have the right to observe and record matters of public concern, especially government activity, police interactions, protests, public events. That's why you see reporters embedded in war zones and standing 10 feet away from riots wearing little blue press helmets like human targets, because visibility matters and documentation matters. So for prosecutors to argue that filming inside a church during a protest equals criminal interference, that's where constitutional lawyers begin clutching their pearls, and rightly so. And remember, a judge initially refused to sign a warrant. That part keeps sticking with me because that's not just a little small detail. Judges don't casually reject probable cause. That's basically the court saying, you don't have enough here. There's not enough of an argument to stand on, which means even within the legal system, there was skepticism. But then comes the grand jury indictment, which shifts power back to prosecutors. And suddenly you've got federal agents showing up at a hotel like it's a drug bust. And that contrast, judicial hesitation versus executive action, is exactly the kind of tension that scholars get very, very nervous about, because it starts to feel less like a neutral law enforcement and more like a message. And we know nowadays those messages matter, because if you're another journalist like watching this all unfold, you're not just thinking about Don Lemon. You're thinking, okay, well, what happens next time I cover something controversial? Do I get arrested too? Do I need a lawyer on speed dial just to film a protest? Is my camera suddenly liability equipment? And like, do I also have the financial means to fight a case if I do get arrested? And once reporters start asking those questions, you've already created what's called a chilling effect, which is a very polite legal phrase that basically means people get scared and stop doing their jobs. And that is dangerous. When journalists stop showing up, the only narrative left is the official one, the government version, the press release version. And that's not journalism. That's propaganda that maybe has a little bit of better lighting. Now, zoom out for a second, because this didn't just happen in a vacuum. This arrest didn't just float down randomly from the sky. It happened in a political climate that is already extremely tense around protests, immigration, religion, and media trust. You've got Attorney General Pam Bondi publicly confirming the arrest and saying federal agents acted at my direction. You've got President Trump praising the prosecution at the National Prayer Breakfast and framing it as protecting churches and religious freedom, which on its face, like that sounds reasonable. Nobody wants worship services disrupted, but you can protect religious freedom without criminalizing journalism. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And where does Trump get off? Let's be real here. Where does he get off? I don't want to know where he gets off. But who does he think he is, pretending that he just like loves a Bible? He can't even hold a Bible the right way up. We've seen him. He also said at this prayer breakfast that he isn't familiar with people praying before they eat. And we know he says a lot of things that he thinks are funny. So I don't know if that was a joke, but like it wouldn't surprise me, because in reality, he's probably the least religious person on the fucking planet. And when political leaders start loudly applauding the arrest of a reporter, it starts to look less like neutral law enforcement and more like political theater and more like Russia, which is when civil liberties groups start raising their eyebrows, because groups like the ACLU and the Committee to Protect Journalists didn't mince their words. They called it dangerous. They called it precedent setting. They warned that prosecuting journalists for covering protests could fundamentally alter how the press operates in America. And these are not drama queens. That sounds really dramatic, but they're not drama queens. These are career constitutional lawyers who spend their lives defending boring technical freedoms that most of us never even think about. So when they say this is serious, it means that it's serious. And public reaction? Predictably split straight down the middle like everything else in this country. Half the internet is yelling, no one is above the law. And the other half is yelling, this is authoritarian. I can't even say the word. The other half is yelling, this is authoritarian. Authoritarian. My God, my tongue doesn't work. This is authoritarian behavior. And honestly, both sides think that they are defending democracy, which is the wild part. We're all arguing about freedom using completely different definitions of freedom. But here is my take, and you can fight me in the comment section on Instagram if you want. Whether you love Don Lemon or hate him is completely irrelevant. It's truly irrelevant. This is bigger than personality, bigger than politics, and bigger than vibes, because rights only matter when they protect people you don't like. If you only defend free speech for people that you agree with, that is not freedom, that is fandom. The First Amendment is messy on purpose. It protects annoying people, controversial people, reporters who ask uncomfortable questions, because once you start carving out expectations for, well, not them, you're already halfway down a very slippery slope. And history shows exactly where that slope leads. So Lemon gets arrested on his own recognizance. No bond, travel restrictions, court date, and he goes right back to work. He walks the Grammy red carpet with his husband, talks to the press, says he will not be silenced, which honestly is fucking icon behavior, because if you're a journalist and you let intimidation stop you, they win. And that's the real kind of subtext here, is intimidation, not necessarily conviction, not jail time, just fear and just enough pressure to make you hesitate. And fear is way cheaper than censorship. You don't even have to shut someone down if you can convince them to shut themselves down. And that is exactly why this matters so much. If you scare someone enough, everyone's just going to shut their mouth. And guess what? We're not done yet. Because if you think that this is the only time the government has pushed hard on journalists recently, oh, babe, A, you haven't been paying attention because we have another FBI raid for you. Let's shift gears and talk about something that should alarm every single person who believes in free press, not just journalists. In mid-January 2026, FBI agents executed a search warrant at the Virginia home of Hannah Nathanson, a reporter for the Washington Post. And they did not just knock politely. They broke in. They seized her electronics, her laptop, phone, a portable recorder, even her smartwatch. This wasn't some small time, like local police action or a parking ticket misunderstanding. This was a federal raid tied to a classified information case. And yes, it made headlines for a good reason. This is the first time in U.S. history that a journalist's home has been raided in connection with a classified leak investigation, and the ripples are already being felt across newsrooms nationwide. What's striking here is how unusual the move was. Typically, when authorities pursue leaks, they subpoena communications or interview potential leakers. They do not send a squad of agents to a journalist's doorstep with the explicit goal of seizing every tool of the trade. Nathanson's home raid was not only aggressive, it was pretty symbolic. It was sending a message about who has access to truth and what the consequences might be for reporting on it. The government's filings confirm that Nathanson herself is not under investigation, which kind of makes the intrusion even more fucking weird and extraordinary. The Post responded immediately, calling the action highly unusual and aggressive, and demanding the return of her devices. Why? Because journalists' laptops and phones are not just devices like your average everyday human uses them. They're repositories of confidential sources, unpublished stories, notes, research, and communication that makes investigative reporting possible. You take those tools away, and suddenly the ability to do journalism is compromised. And yes, the court recognized that. A magistrate temporarily barred federal prosecutors from accessing the seized material while litigation played out. The effects here were immediate. Reporters across the country began reconsidering how they store their notes, communicate with sources, even how they unlock devices. One national security reporter stopped using facial recognition unlock because that can be compelled, and instead relied on passcodes. Another reviewed every single newsroom protocol for securing sources. Just the possibility of a raid, even one that does not target the journalists themselves, can create a chilling effect on the press as a whole. And that's, again, exactly the point. Technology also played its own interesting role here. Nathanson's iPhone, for example, was in lockdown mode, a high security setting that prevents unauthorized access. The FBI literally could not crack it. So here's the irony. A tool designed to protect privacy became the shield that allowed reporting to continue. But the larger takeaway remains: journalist tools of the trade can now be considered fair game for federal action. And that sends a very loud, very uncomfortable message to anyone who dares to investigate power. To fully understand the Nathanson raid, we have to zoom out again and look at the historical pattern. This is not an isolated incident. It's part of a trajectory that started under previous administrations. It was accelerated under Trump and has continued into 2026. Back in the Trump years, I wish it was that long ago, his first term, the DOJ under then Attorney General Jeff Sessions secretly seized communications from journalists in leak investigations. Investigative reporters like James Risen at the New York Times were surveilled and pressured to disclose sources, and that became a cautionary tale for anyone covering national security. Going even further back, even the Obama-era DOJ labeled a Fox News reporter as a criminal in order to seize emails in a leak case, sparking bipartisan backlash. The fallout led to DOJ guidance limiting the circumstances under which reporters' records could be accessed. But those protections were rolled back in later years, undercutting safeguards that journalists had long relied on. Fast forward to more recent times, and we see independent reporters being arrested while covering protests, including the Mario Guevara case in Georgia in 2025. And the pattern is very clear. Pressure is no longer only about records or leaks. It now includes raids, arrests, and the potential for criminal charges simply for being on the scene and reporting and doing your job. For journalists, that shift is seismic. It's not a little baby thing. It's no longer just about doing your job. It's about whether the act of being present can make you a target. This historical context matters because it shows us that the Lemon arrest, the Nathanson raid, and the pressure on independent journalists are part of a continuum. Something that has normalized aggressive government action against reporters. And that normalization is precisely what press freedom advocates have been warning about for years. The response from press freedom advocates was immediate. Groups like the Committee to Protect Journalists, the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia, and investigative reporters and editors all flagged the Nathanson raid as a dangerous precedent. Catherine Jacobson from CPJ said it very bluntly. This raid should disturb all Americans. Using the FBI funded by the taxpayers to seize a reporter's laptop is a blatant violation of journalistic protections and undermines the public's right to know. Jamil Jaffer at Knight First Amendment Institute added that targeting journalists in this way is a hallmark of illiberal governments, not democracies. Diana Fuentes at IRE called the raid unconscionable attack on a free press, emphasizing that the confidentiality between reporters and sources is essential to investigative journalism, and that breach threatens everyone's ability to hold power accountable. Legal scholars also weighed in. David Schulz, a Yale press freedom expert, warned that such raids reverberate across government and newsroom ecosystems, causing sources to go silent and journalists to second-guess their work. The Washington Post editorial leadership echoed these very concerns, calling the raid extraordinary and stressing that it chills communication. It limits transparency and undermines accountability. Even politicians spoke up. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said press freedom is under siege, highlighting the broader implications for democracy. And the message is very clear. This isn't partisan hysteria or clickbait outrage. These are experts, they are lawyers and newsroom leaders pointing out that the foundational rights of free press, source protection, and investigative reporting are all at risk. And that should make you sweat. It should make you clutch your pearls. My palms are a little bit clammy right now. So, I mean, I feel like that's it. I don't even know where else to go with this. I'm like, is someone going to come bust down my door right now? Like, that's the deep dive. That's the thing. Take a breath, because like we covered a lot in a very short or long, what might felt long. We talked arrests, FBI raids, subpoenas, intimidation tactics, government overreach, and the very uncute reality that asking questions and literally doing your job as a journalist can now make you a target, which is kind of wild, right? And then I'm like, wait, am I a journalist? Am I a target? What's even happening here? It's like arresting a lifeguard for swimming in the pool. Make it make sense. And one more thing, just hold on to this, okay? This is not about Don Lemon or Hannah Nathanson or any single story. It's about the message, and it is about fear. And fear, my friends, is the cheapest, most overused tool in the authoritarian starter pack. But here's the good news. And yes, there's always some sort of silver lining, some sort of good news here in the hot air world. Every time they try to intimidate journalists, more people pay attention. Every time they try to suppress a story, it spreads faster. Every time they say, don't look over there, the internet collectively looks over there and goes, okay, well, we're definitely staring now. So we stay informed, we stay curious, we support journalists, and we read past the headline. Caring is hot. Caring is punk rock. Caring is patriotic. And if someone in power is scared of reporters with notebooks and Wi-Fi, maybe you and they should be asking themselves why. So if today's episode made you yell, what the fuck, at least once, or made you send this to your friend, then congratulations, you're officially part of the informed hot girl democracy club. And that's what I love to see. And now after all of that intense, stressful stuff, We're going to balance it with a little chaos, glitter, and flirty fun. This Friday, I'm going to drop a little Valentine's Day episode. It's very short and sweet. It's lighter, it's flirty, it's still my fun hot air energy, but I couldn't do an episode Valentine's Day week without doing a Valentine's Day episode because activism, yes, is important, but so is romance and chocolate and celebrating love in all of its messy, fabulous forms, like wear your red or your pink, text your crush or don't. Keep them guessing. Like, that's hot too. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, give it a like, share it with your friends, leave a review. That's what helps spread the word. Make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Visit my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com, to shop my merch, submit your listener stories and topic suggestions. And until Friday, stay loud, stay curious, stay compassionate, stay being a bad bitch journalist, and do not let the fear silence you. So I'll see you Friday. And I will also see you next Tuesday.